Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere mai, and welcome to The Nichecast. We are from The Niche Case, www.theniche-case.com, where we cover Aotearoa sport to the best of our ability. We love Aotearoa and we love Aotearoa sport, and we just dabble in a bit of avant-garde Aotearoa sporting matters. That means we are going to break down how the Silver Ferns defeated Jamaica. Probably not, though.
Are we?
We're actually going to talk about more interesting sport. And shout out to netball. Not sure of the long-term health of netball as a sport, but we're here for Aotearoa, and we do love a bit of netball. Shout out to netball, battling on against random Jamaican players. Wildcard, just to get the show started and to plug a little bit of website yarn, did a Blackcaps T20 World Cup squad preview, and I was curious. Rolling through that, it was made blatantly clear to me that many of the players that we saw from the Australian series, the ODI series against Australia, many of those players are far better T20 cricketers. And that built a little bit of buzz within my loins about T20 cricket and the T20 World Cup for Aotearoa. And I just want to get a guideline, because this is a really important tournament for the Blackcaps. They made the final of the last T20 World Cup a year ago and basically went off-roading through poo since then. Swept by Australia in the ODI, swept by England in the Test series, Test losses in Aotearoa. It was all quite tricky, all kind of niggly. A year on, we have a nice T20 World Cup in Australia to measure where the Blackcaps are at. But I want to get your opinion on an expectation, a pass mark for the Blackcaps at this T20 World Cup, because we need to get that sorted and clear and out in the open, so that when we get to the end of this T20 World Cup, we're not necessarily like, well, where are the Blackcaps at? What are they doing? Like, it's clear they did this, they didn't do this. How do we feel about it? So what is your expectation or a pass mark for the Blackcaps at this T20 World Cup?
Expectation is that semifinals. I think every major tournament they go to, I feel like semifinals is the target. Whether that's expectation, it's tough because you go from like the super, I think it's the Super 12 format this time. So two groups of six, and then top two go into the semis. Like that's tricky. You got to be one of the two best teams in your group. Like that's not easy. So if they get close to that and are competitive and just a bit unlucky, I can cop that. If they don't challenge for semi-final contention, if they lose to all the good teams in their group, and it is a tough group. They got Australia first up. They got to play England, Afghanistan, a couple qualifiers in there as well, which, I mean, for all we know, could end up being like Sri Lanka and the West Indies, which is far from an easy beat kind of situation. So I do think 2020 is their best format right now, and that's not a good thing when you're going into a test summer, or when you're going into a test series against England away, or when you're going into an ODI series against Australia in Australia. But it is a good thing when you're going into a 2020 World Cup. So that helps. I do think they'll be better here than we've seen them. Semi-finals would for sure be a pass mark. I think missing out through like just bad luck, fall of the play kind of situations, also pass mark. Not being competitive enough to actually challenge to be in that kind of contention, that's a fail.
I would agree on the semi-final kind of benchmark. I'd also add in a bit of a vibe. So we've got the concrete semi-final stage checkpoint. I want to add in a bit of a vibe factor here. I want to see some mana. I want to see a bit of hearty grit from the Blackcaps, because the issue with the Blackcaps that we have discussed, Blackcaps softness, revolves around them crumbling. If the Blackcaps didn't crumble repeatedly in tests and then the ODI series against Australia, it wouldn't be an issue. Like, I'd say they're just in a tough patch, and some retirements, everything's moving along and changing, and we keep rolling forward. But the manner of their defeats in tests and in their ODI series have been concerning. There's not a lot of grit, not of like, especially in Test cricket, fighting hard for a draw. So even if the Blackcaps don't necessarily crack the semi-finals, but there is some sort of backbone and real hardness to their performances, niggling the opposition, battling through adversity to make it a competitive contest, all that stuff I think is going to be really important for the Blackcaps vibe heading into the summer, because if they crumble again, then we're dealing with the three-headed crumble. It might be
crumbling.
apple crumble, pear crumble, and maybe mandarin crumble if I can invent a dessert. Not sure how that tastes, but that is 3 different varieties of crumble. And if the Blackcaps crumble at this T20 World Cup, it will be a trio of crumbles. Test crumbling, ODI crumbling, and T20 World Cup crumbling, which isn't good. It's good for dessert. It's good for a bit of a munch, but it's not good.
I mean, I don't know about the mandarin crumble for dessert, but
I'll get back to you on
plums or something. Maybe, I don't know.
No, I'll get back to you about the mandarin crumble. I'll go collect some mandarins and we'll
whip some up and see how it goes.
See what we can do. Big up the niche cage. Big up the Blackcaps. We'll be tracking them. Shout out the White Ferns. They are in the West Indies. They are playing another game tomorrow against the West Indies after a very strange first ODI. They'll be played tomorrow morning, and tomorrow is a Friday, which means email newsletter is sent out Friday evening, and I guarantee you that email banger will include White Ferns versus West Indies notes, probably include some Kiwi-NRL junior deep cut notes as well, grand finals in Queensland and New South Wales. I'll be doing a NRL women's semi-final preview tomorrow as well for the website. That is to say, the email dispatch Friday evening, mandatory reading for Aotearoa sports fans, especially if you're interested in the sports that we cover. Not going to break down Silver Ferns netball, not going to break down All Blacks rugby, but we do dive into a lot of other Aotearoa sporting funk, and we know that's what Kiwi sports fans love. They love all sports, they love Aotearoa, and that is what we are here to deliver. So sign up to the email banger, thenichecage.substack.com. And earlier in the week, this podcast is still there for your listening, with the All Whites versus Socceroos coming up Thursday evening and, of course, Sunday afternoon. There is an All Whites versus Socceroos preview in the Patreon podcast for the Patreon whānau, patreon.com/El Niche Cage, EL Niche Cage. And we also discussed the Blackcaps T20 squad. So big up to the Patreon whānau. There is that podcast for you on the Patreon feed. And if you do want to support the Niche Cage and all our content directly straight up the guts, like James Fisher-Harris steaming up off a kickoff or something like that, Taumalolo up the guts, out of dummy half, support us straight up the guts, patreon.com/EL Niche Cage. Big up to everyone who supports us via Patreon, and that is the best way to support us directly if you do enjoy the Aotearoa sporting content. Wildcard, time for mindfulness.
It is, and I'm dipping into another book here. So, where are we?
Are you talking a 1B5?
I'm talking, where are we? 182 pages of vintage publishing goodness here. Shout out to vintage publishers. This is a quote from Jesus, but not from the actual Bible. This is from the Gnostic Gospels, which doesn't actually show up on the Zoom too well. But do yourself a favor and check out the story of the Gnostic Gospels, because I was just reading this introduction to this book the other day, and it was nuts. It's like the Da Vinci Code in real life. And I don't know how I'd never heard a whole lot about this before. But according to the suppressed, heretical, hidden Gnostic Gospel, somewhere in there, Jesus said, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you.
Eaten alive from within.
Yeah, by your failed potential, your unfulfilled potential.
Have you Do you know much about the Kybalion? Kyba
Yes,
Elion?
I know of it.
Yeah, that's a good one as well. Just throwing that
Mm.
out there for any of the listeners. Like, I've definitely got a 1B5 here full of Aotearoa Sporting Mindfulness right with me, but a better mindfulness book is definitely the Kybalion or the like Hermes.
Yeah, right.
He's got like a philosophy line as well. And for some reason, the Kybalion popped up when you were talking about your vintage publication there.
Yeah, I think the Kybalion is like Jewish, I think. I'm not sure. The Gnostic Gospels are like just extra books that I don't know if they're written by what do you call them? I forget what they call the people who wrote them. Just like they could have been extra books in the Bible, but they were sort of early Christianity when everyone's trying to figure out the dimensions of this thing. And pretty much a lot of the stuff was quite like a lot of the stuff that got buried and suppressed was like more Eastern influenced, goes against some of the ideas that became canon in the Bible that people know of now. And so basically it becomes a power struggle between like the very early Catholic Church, and they like destroy all these things. And the reason they've got like these 52 books or whatever it is, 52 chapters, I think more accurately, of the Gnostic Gospels is because some dude just randomly was digging some soil up in the mountains somewhere in like the Middle East and found this old like container with all this like 1600-year-old paper. They weren't the actual books, they were copies of the books, but they were the first known copies, like complete, that anyone had discovered. It's like real life Da Vinci Code, but better because it's not written by Dan Brown. So crazy yarns. And then there's also this whole thing about like what happened afterwards, because people started being like, I want this expensive, trying to trade it. The Egyptian, I think it must have been in Egypt, because it was the Egyptian museum tried to get a hold of it all and then didn't want to sell it and didn't want to show it to people. And then Western scholars wanted to look at it. It's just kind of why it's not that famous, is because it just got, even after they got rediscovered, like nearly 2,000 years later, somehow still surviving, scholars just started fighting over it and being like, I have access, you don't have access. No, I want to have a look at this, and I can't afford to pay this because these guys are charging heaps of money for access to it. And very weird. But it's all translated now, so you can go and find whatever they said. Apparently it's a bit more like Jesus as the Buddha type stuff, which sounds quite interesting to me, if I'm telling the truth.
The Kybalion is a study of Hermetic philosophy from ancient Egypt and Greece. And I would recommend that. You can just go on YouTube, chuck on the audio book, listen to it before you go to bed, along with the other classics, the Tao Te Ching. You might go a bit of 48 Laws of Power. You might go a bit of
chuck in some Marcus Aurelius. Maybe a bit of Plato if you so desire.
Oh, what's the Dhammapada?
Right.
Are you familiar with that one, Dhammapada?
I'm not.
It's similar. It's similar to Tao Te Ching, I think, off the top of my head. But we're going too deep into mindfulness here, Wildcard. We're an Aotearoa sports podcast, not a Hermetic philosophy podcast. What we are going to do right here and now is in my curiosity and my ponderings yesterday, I was thinking this is going to be the last time we see the All Whites play football for a while. And I think there's a bit of buzz around this series. I'm quite excited for the series against Australia. And what I want to know, which I think is going to be beneficial for the listener and really engaging with All Whites football over the next couple of days to then take us forward into the next cycle, just some key tactical, stylistic notes about All Whites football. Danny Hay is the coach. He's going to be the coach for the next wee while, so you can pick up some trends or themes from this little series. And you're going to interrupt?
Well, yeah, maybe on the Danny Hay thing, because technically he was contracted until the end of the World Cup cycle. And because these games are before the World Cup was going to finish, it's still part of that cycle because the World Cup hasn't happened yet, right? But after November, technically off contract. Don't really see anyone else necessarily putting their hands up from the domestic scene. They could apply for takers overseas. But Danny Hay has sort of said like, I don't know if I'll resign. I think if he wants to, it'll be his job. So most likely he will be the coach for the foreseeable future. And I do think he's bluffing when he says this, but he has come out and said a few things like, well, I don't know. I'm not too happy about the fact that they're not having games in the next couple windows. Might not see them again till like March or something. I'm not too pleased with that, so I don't know if I will resign or not. It does feel like bluffing. I think he likes this job and he's relatively good at it, and I suspect he wants to continue at it. But that is a point to make. Technically is off contract after these games, so you never know.
I'm sure New Zealand football could go sign Arsene Wenger or someone of that ilk. What I am curious about Wildcard is Kiwi football fans filling up their gumboots with all whites mud. And they're not going to be seen for a while. Football fans need to get stuck in with all whites football, connect to what they're doing, really engage with how they're playing their football. And my question to you was yesterday and is today to deliver 3 tactical, stylistic notes about all whites football, stuff that you might be really tracking in the series against Australia, and stuff that you can share with the listener to really deeply engage with how the all whites are playing their footy.
Yeah, point number 1 is by far the biggest point, and I could have just done 3 variations of this one point. It could have been the whole thing, but it's the same thing as you see when the football ferns play as well. Same thing as the all whites. It's where are the goals going to come from? And I'm not so much thinking about like the aftermath, like they score some goals, looking back, well, what did they do? What sort of situations did these arise from? I'm not so much interested in that as I am interested in like the input version of how do they think, like what is the plan to score goals? Because goals can come from anywhere, a defensive mistake or whatever. You don't plan for that kind of thing. But I'm like, what is the plan that the all whites have? How do they want to do things? I don't see them being a counter-attacking team whatsoever, because I don't think Australia are going to play a high enough defensive line for that to be the case, which is fine because Costa Rica certainly didn't, and the Oceania teams they played before that certainly didn't, so it's not something they've been working on or really preparing for. They have definitely been, we saw this in the OFC games, really dominant in the air, set pieces, corner kicks, headers, those kind of things. Bill Tuiloma, Chris Wood, those guys in particular, but there's plenty of other guys in there who can get up and win a few headers and threaten from those situations. So that's probably the first and foremost guess I would have as to what they're hoping to do. And in terms of open play stuff, generally they have been playing with a back 3 more recently, like to get those wing backs nice and high. And one thing about Kakache, and it was Kerwin, I would guess probably Tim Payne, for the reason that he is the best crosser of the alternatives as well. On the right, those are 2 wing backs who are going to be able to put a good ball into the area, which again brings out like Chris Wood's heading ability and stuff like that. So that's cool. They're a little bit of high press might be a factor. Chris Wood's pretty good at that, despite the fact that he's a tall, lumpy striker. He is relatively mobile off the ball. He moves around, he closes down, he does those kind of the 1%ers that have impressed as Newcastle coaches, at least, although the fans probably only looking at goal tallies. Alex Grieve or whoever it is up front, Callum McCowd, Eli Just, guys like this, Matt Garbutt, these are all guys who are quick and young and fit and will be able to press as well. So I think that's maybe another one. And yeah, just trying to, the trickiness is ordinarily a lot of this would go through Sarpreet Singh. Obviously, he's not there this time. Hopefully, the next time they play, he will be there. He should be anyway. He shouldn't be out too much longer. He's getting close to full capacity training again at his club in Germany. So his loan club in Germany at SSV Jan Regensburg in the 2nd tier. So there's like a few different ideas. Interesting, like, do they change things tactically? Do they have some idea that's specific to playing Australia of how they might score? I don't know. Will Australia be like susceptible to the press or any of those kind of things? We'll find that out. But that's definitely the first major factor is like, how are the all whites setting up? How are they planning to score their goals against Australia? Because, I mean, Costa Rica game, lost 1-0, conceded in like the 4th minute of the game or whatever, and never found an equalizer. Did have one disallowed, of course, but even still, like, you don't score a goal, you don't win games of football. So it's pretty important. That was a problem in that game, and it is something that they're still working on in terms of getting the best out of Chris Wood as much as anything as well. So that's the first and by far the biggest point. You want to add anything to that, or shall I go on?
Keep moving. Second one.
Second one, these other two are a little bit, not so in depth, but second one, just the balance of selection. It's 2 games in 4 days. Australia have already pretty much said, like, they picked a 30-plus man squad. They basically said, like, pick one team for the first game, one team for the second game. They want to spread it out, give everyone an opportunity to put their hands up for contention for that World Cup squad. The All Whites, maybe a little bit closer to full strength both games, I would imagine. Danny Hay was a little bit sort of reticent in wanting to answer that question. I would guess one of the main reasons is because when he did his press conference Wednesday morning, Bill Tuiloma and Alex Grieve, both of whom started against Costa Rica, weren't actually yet in Australia. They hadn't arrived in the country yet, traveling from their weekend's games at their various clubs, opposite sides of the world, one in Portland, one in Scotland. So that's a factor. I think Andre Jong, he said, had only just got in the night before as well, and he hadn't even had a chance to see him because he was still sleeping off the travel, sleeping off the jet lag that morning. So some of those might be a factor in selections as well. Also, obviously, Clayton Lewis is injured from last time. Nico Kerwin is injured from last time. And it seems pretty obvious Tim Payne, Marko Stamenic, easy replacements for those guys, but it is something to consider, especially when, as I say, 2 games in 4 days, and a lot of these guys have flown in from Europe or America, which means a big flight to Australia on the way in, big flight back to wherever they came from on the way out. That's difficult, and like sort of load management, as they say, will be a factor. So that's something to consider. And then the third one is just, I'm a little bit curious about how they arrange that midfield, because we've seen few different instances of this. Generally, they sort of like the two sort of passing deeper playmaker types in the base with an attacking midfielder in front. That's a lot easier to do when Sarpreet Singh is available. Matt Garbutt did that role recently, and because of his sort of energy and work rate, he gives you a really good 60 minutes. Maybe not the polished class of a Sarpreet Singh, certainly not at this stage of his career, but he can do a pretty good job against Costa Rica. So that's the most likely thing, with then Bell and Stamenic behind. But it'll be interesting to see, because Stamenic you could play as just like a CDM and push Bell a little further forward if you wanted to spread that out a bit more. Or you could do it the other way around, as Bell is like a sweeping midfielder and Stamenic further forward, which is kind of more like what he's been doing for Copenhagen recently. Side note, Copenhagen fired their coach like the day after he flew out to Australia. So when he gets back, he'll have a new coach, and hopefully that doesn't affect his playing minutes, but you never know, those things can get pretty frisky. But yeah, just the balance of the midfield, because ordinarily, I mean, Ryan Thomas hasn't been able to play because of injuries for quite a while, but he would be a first 11 player where he fit and playing regularly. Sarpreet Singh certainly would be. Clayton Lewis has been in recent times. So there's a few guys missing, and it is probably a easy selection to say Bell, Stamenic, and Garbutt in some capacity, unless they change the formation. But just curious to see how, first of all, how they set up in terms of shape, but also in terms of role, like what they're asked to do. Is one going to sit more defensively? Do you want two to sit more defensively? Because you could easily do that with Bell and Stamenic, and then shut off the threat of Aaron Moy dropping in and picking passes and stuff like that. But yeah, that's 1, 2, and 3. Where the goal is going to come from, how does Danny Hay rotate his squad, and then just how that midfield looks is the 3 things that I picked out anyway.
Sneaking under the radar this weekend as well, wildcard, is Joseph Parker fighting Joe Joyce. Would imagine they're both Joseph, so you got a Joseph Parker versus a Joseph Joyce. Similar name there to old William Williams, famed Canterbury Lancashire seam bowler.
Took 4 wickets this morning, I saw.
Lots of wickets were taken in that game, I believe. Ajaz Patel took some wickets as well.
Oh, nice.
Will Young scored some runs as well. So a nice little bit of county cricket there. Obviously, Ajaz Patel, Will Young, not necessarily T20 superstars, so they are playing county championship cricket in England. Joseph Parker, wildcard, he's had 6 consecutive wins since his loss to Dillian White. The first three of those were all finishes. KO versus Flores, TKO versus Leapai, TKO versus Winters. No idea that Joseph Parker fought a dude called Shaundell Winters, but apparently that happened. And then 3 wins by decision, starting with that Junior Far fight. Then 2 wins, split decision against Derek Chisora, and then a unanimous decision against Chisora late last year. Now Parker is preparing for his 3rd consecutive fight in Manchester as well. So he's you've talked a lot about this connection with Tyson Fury, their little bromance and their training partnership, and how because David Naika spent some time there last time around, like maybe before the when he had that professional fight.
I think the first Chisora fight, he was over there for that. But more recently, Nick has been working in Australia with a guy who I can't remember his name, but a pretty well-known Aussie trainer. It sounds like Nigel Thornberry, but I don't think it's Nigel Thornberry. It's something like that, though.
Good bit of Thornberries there. I remember that. That was a good show.
Yeah, it was a good show. Little Donnie was. I found out years later that Donnie was voiced by Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers, which makes perfect sense when you think about it. But I didn't know that at the time. Probably didn't know who Flea was at the time, to be fair. I think Nick has been based in Australia more recently, and that's why he's also going to be on the card in a couple of weeks, along with Himiahio in the rematch of the last one. They were also on the undercard of Kambosos versus Haney in Melbourne.
Joseph Parker, it seems like in a weird spot, wildcard. Like he has got some a bit of a resurgence under this Tyson Fury positive energy. Like sometimes athletes from Aotearoa have to go walkabouts to raise their mana. Like a lot of times athletes from Aotearoa, they come back to Aotearoa to raise their mana. It seems like Joseph Parker's elevated his mana by going overseas, going to the UK. I think he's living in the same little town as Tyson Fury, and he's just best buddies with Tyson Fury. And now
it sounds like they might be living in the same house.
Fair enough. Now they have now Parker has 6 consecutive wins. Bit of positive energy, but he's not exactly a razzle-dazzle boxer right now, is he? Like he's not finishing blokes, and he's not demanding big ticket fights. Heavyweight boxing is trucking along pretty nicely right now, but Joseph Parker is not a marquee heavyweight boxer in the world. I don't think there's that buzz around him, but he does have 6 consecutive wins, and I'm curious, wildcard, what kind of challenge is Joe Joyce going to present Joseph Parker? Are you feeling confident about a 7th consecutive win? And as long as you're in the heavyweight boxing realm and you've got a decent win streak, you're going to be in the mix for something, right? Like if you've got a nice win streak and you're also finishing blokes, that's when you get the big ticket fights. That's when you become a global superstar. Joseph Parker's got the win streak. I just don't think he's done so in the most entertaining fashion. So what challenge do you see Joe Joyce presenting Mr. Parker? The Uso?
Noel Thornberry is the guy's name that Nick is working with, so that's that one solved.
Joe Joyce.
There's definitely something on the line. Like you're right in that Parker has been a little bit the stoppages have dried up, but to be fair, the stoppages were never prominent for him. You know, he didn't beat Andrew Ruiz by stoppage. He didn't beat Carlos Takam by stoppage. You know, that's never really been what he's done when he's fought the better guys on his record. He's a 12-round, tally him up kind of fighter, like just good technical stuff, hard to knock down. And that can take you a long way as long as you win. Like that's only a problem if you lose. As long as you keep winning, then whether people are like, whether that's might not make you as much money because you won't get quite the same pay-per-view tickets, but you will at least be able to rise your way up the ranks. And weirdly, he does seem to have dropped off almost all the rankings, even though Chisora is still on one of them, and he just beat Chisora twice in a row. So how that happens, I have no idea, but boxing is confusing in this way, except for one, which is the WBO. And Parker is the second ranked challenger on the WBO. I think he probably has been targeting this one a little bit in recent times. First ranked challenger on the WBO, Joe Joyce. So this is actually, they've said, the WBO have said, whoever wins this takes their interim title, which basically means next in line to fight Alexander Usyk is the guy who holds this belt, as he holds about 3 of them, and then Tyson Fury has the other one. Fury likely to fight Joshua next, it sounds like, because Usyk is a little bit busy with his country being at war and also a couple injuries. So combine those two things together, he doesn't want to fight until 2023 again, which is fair enough. He's champion, so he do what he wants. But when he does come back around, the winner of Joyce and Parker is potentially, and I don't know if it'll happen because a unification bout would take precedence. So if Tyson Fury doesn't retire after a Joshua win, if that should come to pass, and they don't have a rematch clause, then, you know, if he wants to fight Alexander Usyk, then that will happen ahead of Parker or Joyce against Usyk. But if that doesn't happen, or if Joshua and Fury go to a rematch or whatever, or Fury retires, they could have a shot. Whoever wins this could have a shot at Usyk. Let's say within the next 6 to 12 months, something around in that range. So there's a lot on the line here, and it's a tricky fight. You know, Joyce is a large fellow. He's 37, but he hasn't had a big professional career. A lot of amateur stuff. I think he was a medalist at one of the Olympics and things like that. So a lot of hype around him for that reason in England, maybe not so much elsewhere. But of course, the fight is in England, so it is going to be Parker again, sort of as the visitor, as the challenger, even though he is the more storied guy, like he has the better record. Joyce is undefeated, but he hasn't really beaten anyone of the caliber of the top couple of wins that Parker has on his record. So Parker is his toughest fight yet. Joyce is not Parker's toughest fight yet, but I mean, Parker probably lost his 2 toughest fights, Dillian Whyte and Anthony Joshua, so that doesn't necessarily mean anything from his perspective. But it is important to consider that for Joe Joyce, this is a step up that he maybe, it's putting him in a new tier that he hasn't been in before. How that affects the fight, I don't know. Parker's had a lot of training at fighting guys who have a reach advantage and a height advantage over him, because that's something he targeted specifically, knowing that, like, Tyson Fury, although that's never going to happen now because they're best mates, they're not going to fight. But back before they were best mates, you still had to look at the heavyweight division and say Tyson Fury's a big guy, Anthony Joshua was a big guy, Klitschko when he was still going, big guy. Like, this is something for several years, like going way back. Parker has known that he's going to have to fight guys who are taller and longer than him. So that shouldn't be too much of a factor. I don't know, but we'll see. Like, there's only one way to find out. It's a little hard to know what to expect from Joe Joyce because of that whole fact that he hasn't fought at this level so much. Parker has, but also, I guess the big wild card with Parker is just because we saw, you know, let's be honest, we saw in the Junior Far fight, maybe a little bit stale. Parker had sort of run out of ideas a little bit. And so wisely, I would say, afterwards, he split with Kevin Barry, linked up through Tyson Fury with Andy Lee. And his first Chisora fight, you saw ideas. You didn't necessarily see success from the new things he was trying, but you saw some ideas being like, he's trying to be busier. He's trying to throw more punches, this kind of thing, be more active. Andy Lee's spoken about how he felt that Joseph Parker maybe had lapses in concentration throughout 12-round fights where he would not so much let the other guy in, but just not be ruthless and take his opportunities in the same way. He could have, you know, made things more emphatic if he had been more aggressive at times. So that's something they've been working on. Definitely did see that in the second Chisora fight. You did see an improved performance. They've had a lot more time to work with each other since. What do we see against Joe Joyce? Like, do we see new and improved Joseph Parker continuing just to go up and up and up with the more time he works with Andy Lee? Or do we see struggles from a leopard trying to change his spots or whatever? Or the different type of opponent he's up against is a factor in all this too? I don't know, but that is the big sort of question mark about Parker in this fight is that combination with Andy Lee and just how much progress they have made together. And we don't know. Like I can't say until you see him in the ring and see what he gets up to, you know.
From those two fights against Derek Chisora, what do you view as Joe Parker's main strength or his main weapon?
Quick hands, I would say. It's been the same throughout. Like people thought because he was knocking plebs out when he was like 22, he was going to be David Tua 2.0. Like he's big knockout power. As we said before, not the case. Never at any point has he really shown that against top tier opponents, but he's always had quick hands and he can throw good combinations. He's hard to hurt. Has been knocked down a couple times more recently, just in some like Dillian White got him. But I mean, the hand speed is always going to be elite, and that is the thing that he can bank on. You like build everything else around the fact, like when he gets his jab going, he can swing him around pretty well. So that I would say biggest strength.
Is it like pitter-patter point fighting hand speed, or is it?
You probably.
Is it like hand speed? Here's a couple punches, boom. There's a heavy one.
More the first than the second option, I would say. But I mean, the more you hit a guy, the more you wear him down. Especially because his fitness has been relatively good against a lot. Like he was definitely fitter than Chisora. That was a factor in being able to beat him twice. Was like he can keep going. Chisora couldn't keep going at the same level, and not being a power puncher does help that a little bit. You know, you don't tie yourself up with just big almighty swings in the first 4 rounds, kind of thing.
NRL semi-finals this weekend. Wild card. We got the Cowboys versus Eels tomorrow night, Friday night up in Townsville, and then you got Panthers versus Rabbitohs in Sydney on Saturday. And the place to start wildcard is the Eels, because there is something that seems quite transparent, but I'm not 100% certain what is happening. Because the bro, Tom Opachik, has been named at centre, and he had a hamstring injury that he sustained during the game last week against the Raiders, and that resulted in Aotearoa Kiwi's centre, Marata Niukore, moving from the middle forward position to left centre, where he scored a couple tries. And none of that should be surprising, right? Niukore is good enough to play centre for Aotearoa Kiwis. He's good enough to play centre at the NRL level. Like, regardless of how Aussies feel or anything like that, playing centre for Aotearoa Kiwis against Tonga at Mount Smart, fairly good test for your centre abilities. And Marata Niukore passed that test with flying colours. So Opachik has a hamstring niggle, and that is not something you want to carry into a semi-final. Like maybe if you've got a rolled ankle, maybe if you've got the flu, maybe if you've got some sort of thing that you can needle up or something like that, hamstrings are not something you want to fuck with. So I am doubtful that Opachik plays. Along with that, you've got this, like nothing about the Eels team list named on Tuesday should be taken seriously, considering that Marata Niukore has been named on the bench and then started the game in the number 17 jersey at lock for 5 consecutive rounds. So the last 5 weeks of NRL footy, finals included, Marata Niukore has been named on the bench on Tuesday. Game day, he is starting at lock. So, again, Marata Niukore is named on the bench this week, and Opachik is named at centre. Interestingly, their wildcard is that Makahisi Makatoa has played nearly every game this season off the bench, and while he does play a smaller role, like he's a perfect role player, shout out New Plymouth, shout out Cook Islands for Makatoa, he will be at the World Cup there as well. He's a reliable figure through the middle. But for this game on Tuesday, Makatoa was dropped to the extended bench and Bryce Cartwright took his position on the bench. And all of that is to say, my prediction is that Opachik will not play. Niokore will start at centre, and then Makatoa just comes onto the bench. If that is to happen, wildcard, that takes us away from the glorious matchups of Niokore versus Taumalolo if they were both to start at lock. If Niokore is coming off the bench, then he's suddenly sharing minutes, sharing game time with Griffin Neame, the Greymouth geezer. But if Niokore is starting at left centre, that puts him up against Petahiku. Petahiku was the other Kiwi centre in that test against Tonga, and that is just a very interesting proposition and something I want to share with the listener, because that is how I believe the Eels might line up, especially with the hamstring complaint for Opacek. And there's a lot of, to me, this is why Niokore is such a valuable footy player. There's no one left in this NRL semi-finals who can play middle forward and centre equally as well. And Niakore's done that at the NRL level. He's only played centre for the Kiwis, so he might get some game time through the middle at the World Cup. Then we can say that no one else in international footy is playing centre and middle forward like Niokore, which is pretty impressive. But I believe this is an example of Niakore's value and the class he brings to multiple positions.
Yeah, that's always the trick with a versatile player, is like you get players who are versatile because they can do a job in multiple positions. And sometimes it's like, I have a specialist position, but if you need me to cover this, I can do that. Like that's one of the, often when you see forwards going into the centers, that's the case. Like a center's been concussed or something. Edge forward, slide out, couple steps, no dramas, do a job for a wee while. But to be able to like play at an international level as a starter in multiple positions, two like contrasting positions like that, because it's not just sliding out in the defensive line a bit from edge forward to center, it's like middle forward to center. It's kind of unprecedented, and well, not unprecedented, but extremely rare. And to be able to do a proper job to where you could like, like he seems to me like he's obviously definitely a back row first and foremost. But if you can start if it comes to pass, if you can start a Kiwis test and also an NRL semi-final at center, then you're clearly a very good center as well. Like regardless of the fact that someone else is injured, you're moving out, like you're obviously very good at that job too. So to be very good at two different completely contrasting positions, that's the kind of versatility that is like, rooster's eggs kind of rare. Like you don't get many players who can do that. You often like normally versatility are like not good enough to be a starter in one spot, so it can play 4 different spots, and then that's how I get in the team. Or like the example I used before, really good in one spot, but can do a job in another spot if it comes to path. Being good enough to be selected in your off position in an international game and an NRL semi-final, potentially, that means it's not your off position. Like, that just means you got 2 positions you can play really well. And he is joining the Warriors next year, isn't he?
Correct. Niokore started at lock for a few games now. All those games where he was named on the bench and then starts at lock. Jason Taumalolo starts at lock. Never seen Jason Taumalolo start at centre. I'm sure he could do it, like he's a freak. But he hasn't done it. So that puts into context what Niokore is doing. But the premise of him versus Petahiku, like, what's Niokore going to do well? He is going to run straight at Petahiku a lot of times. And Petahiku is going to be sore the next day tackling Marata Niokore. What does Petahiku do well? We saw this against in the CSF Talakai matchup. Petahiku, footwork, shimmy, offloads, passing. He's got the whole attacking skill set. While like Niokore is better defensively because he's a bigger body, he's more physical, he's gonna whack you. But Petahiku does his job defensively in a very good team as well. So that would be a very tasty matchup, I'd say. Obviously, Taumalolo is going to be important. I think how the Eels deal with Taumalolo will be very interesting as well, because they have I think the Eels forward pack is better. And I believe they are well equipped to kind of nullify what Taumalolo does. And what Taumalolo is doing right now is a lot more than he was doing during his peak years, like 2015, 2017, those type of seasons. Now Taumalolo is passing the ball extremely well. He's having dummy half runs, which is very impressive, as well as his typical carting the footy upfield. I think the Eagles are going to be well aware of how Taumalolo pops up in 2022. Like, there'll be a lot of tape on Taumalolo. They'll be doing a lot of like wrestling on Taumalolo. They'll be eager to put some shots on him to slow him down. And I don't know, like, if you can limit Taumalolo, I believe the Eels can easily defeat the Cowboys. Just slowing their roll downfield, and what Taumalolo does. Like, if he's getting out of dummy half, he's easily making 10 meters and he's leaving a couple defenders on the floor. So then it's quick play the ball, and then it starts up for the next bloke. And that allows Tom Dead and Chad Townsend. It's like a flow-on effect that we know so well in rugby league and rugby union, just getting that momentum through the middle.
How often is he scooping up these dummy half runs? Because that's like just the idea in my head of Jason Taumalolo scooping up it from dummy half is kind of fearful. Like, it's one of those things that a guy of his like build, and like, as you say, he's a freak. He can do things that guys of his size don't normally have, like, just can't do. That's kind of insane, though. Like, because how do you stop that when he's got the momentum and you're like a retreating defensive line kind of thing?
And you got to think,
like you say, it's 10 easy meters.
Dummy halves only run on the back of a quick play the ball. But you don't have a slow play the ball and the defense is up in your face and you decide, hey, I'm going to run, and you make 5 meters. So that, like, the fact that dummy halves only run off the back of a quick play the ball, and then that dummy half is Taumalolo, like, it compounds on top of each other, because the next play the ball is going to be rapid as well. I think he did it once against the Sharks, and there's been some other games where he's had 2 dummy half runs. He had 1 dummy half run for 14 meters against the Sharks. And, like, we're not talking 3, 4, 5 dummy half runs, because the Cowboys do a good job. Peter Hiku's going to get out of dummy half. Valentine Holmes is going to get out of dummy half. Reece Robson's obviously a data as well. So it's only going to be once or twice. It might be 0 if the Eels are winning that battle of the forwards, though. And that's a key factor. Is, as I said, Taumalolo is going to run out of dummy half if his team's rolling forward. If the Eels are physically on top of the Cowboys, it limits a lot of this. And then suddenly Taumalolo's passing game just looks a bit sideways. Like, he's just shuffling the ball on. And then suddenly Jason Taumalolo has to take a lot more first receiver runs just to get his team rolling downfield. So the issue for the Eels is they don't necessarily show up with that sort of intensity and vigor every single week. They lacked it round 1, I think it was the Panthers of the finals. And what happened next? They bounced back against the Raiders. So what's going to happen this week? They're going down. But I don't think they will.
Pattern, yeah.
But that's the pattern, and I think that is the caution around the Eels, because if they're slightly off with their intensity, their concentration, and their vigor, the Cowboys will roll through them. And Taumalolo, like, I think he had 82 or 83 minutes out of 93 minutes in that Sharks finals game, which is bloody impressive. He's played over 60 minutes in a bunch of games this season. The issue there is that more Taumalolo minutes means less Griffin Neame minutes. But I do believe you will see Neame play quite a bit against the Eels because of their forward pack. Right? He's a very powerful forward pack, and I believe the Cowboys will need Griffin Neame doing his 15 minutes to 20 minutes through the middle as well. Just a big body, mobile offload. But here's a key idea wildcard. For the Eels to win, I believe Dylan Brown has to be either the best player on the field or the second best player on the field. Whether that is second best to a Cowboys player, I don't know. Whether it's second best to Mitchell Moses, I don't know. I don't care. Dylan Brown has to either be the best player on the field or the second best player. I think he's super capable of doing that. He's shown he's shown development throughout his career, but now you're starting to see in finals footy. Do you remember, like, there's this, over the last few years watching the Eels, they have looked like quite tame in attack. Like, there's been narratives about them going sideways and struggling to score points. I've got visions of like Mitchell Moses creeping across field, and that those stories have been written, those discussions have been had, and I think an easy fix that the Eels can do, and they have done, is if Dylan Brown's at first receiver. Because how do you stop going sideways? How do you engage defenders in front of you? You get the best running half at first receiver. Dylan Brown is the only half in the semi-finals who averages over 100 running meters. There are only two halves in the top 50 for running meters. One is Dylan Brown. He is 25th, I believe. But he's played a few extra games. So he's going to have more running meters because the Eels have played an extra game. He averages 125 running meters per game. The only other half in the top 50 is Nico Hines, who averages 117 meters per game. So you can either play Dylan Brown as like a second receiver where he is isolating edge defenders. He can put on footwork. He can get into space, get an offload, make a line break. And you can put Dylan Brown at first receiver where he is a running threat. Whether he does run or he doesn't run, the defenders in front of him have to be engaged and focus on him. And if Dylan Brown is getting the ball at first receiver, he might take a few steps towards the defensive line, then passing out to Mitchell Moses. Suddenly Mitchell Moses has more space because the 2 or 3 middle defenders have to pay attention to Dylan Brown. And this isn't like, let's get Cody Nikorima to run the ball more. Let's get Sean Johnson to run the ball more. This isn't a case of we need someone to straighten up the attack. This is Dylan Brown, the best running and tackling half in the NRL, posing that threat. And I think that is super important to the Eels because it just opens everything else up, and it shows Dylan Brown's development because he can do a bit more. Like, he's just picking his spots where he chimes in, bit of organization at first receiver, just setting up other blokes as well as posing his own threat as well.
I watched bits and pieces of that game where they smoked the Raiders last week. I didn't watch the whole thing because it became a bit of a foregone conclusion. But looking at the NRL website, it says he had 321 run meters last week, which I can remember one big runaway, but that's a fucking lot of run meters.
That is an anomaly, right? Like, all the run meters from that game are huge.
Yeah, I think they had like 5 guys over 200 or something.
But throughout the season, he averages 125 meters.
4 guys.
So he's 100 meters per game. And when you think, like, Isaiah Papali'i averages 140, 150 meters per game.
And had 232 in this game as well.
Bottom 8 teams would love to have 2 of their forwards averaging 260 meters per game combined. The Eels have a half and an edge forward doing that, right? Like, and when you think about, like, it's a pretty simple game. You're just trying to get down the other end of the field to score tries. What helps you do that? Making meters. Your team is going to make X amount of meters. And your half and your edge forward are guaranteed at least 100 meters each every game. I think that's beneficial. I think that's helpful, especially when one of them is Isaiah Papali'i, very robust, very dynamic, also got a bit of an offload this season, And then you've got Dylan Brown, who's all skill, can kick, can pass, as well as that running ability. And we know Dylan Brown's one of the best defensive halves in the NRL. Isaiah Publi is a fantastic defender as well. And I think just that north-south idea, because now I'm thinking about it, I didn't write this in the preview, but that idea of the Eels going sideways and kind of mediocre attack, it was kind of like last season in patches. Like, have you dealt with that? Have you come across that?
Yeah, bits and pieces, but it's not something that would have stuck in my head necessarily as to trying to figure out answers and whatever. They're not the team I support, so
yeah. But I'm just curious if that idea.
But yeah, there is a
yeah, and because they haven't been as clinical as some people would hope they have been in recent seasons, but the north-south factor, straight lines, every time Nathan Cleary gets the ball at halfback, he's taken a couple steps north, straight towards the defensive line, and then he can pass it out wide or he can shimmy across field, but the first few steps need to be direct. And all the best halves do that, all the best teams do that, and then you've got someone like Dylan Brown, who averages 125 meters per game, offering that threat. And that's all it needs to be, is offering that threat. So I'm really interested to see how that game plays out. Obviously, back in the Eels here, just especially with their Kiwi-NRL presence. And when you think about Kiwis halves, Jerome Hughes does the same thing. Jerome Hughes was a fullback who got turned into a halfback, and that tells you what you need to know about his running game. So that bodes well for the Kiwis, and it also puts into perspective what other halves lack is their running game. Even Tommy Dearden is a dynamic runner now, and that's what you need. Whereas other teams, perhaps like the Warriors, don't have that north-south type of running threat in their team. Any thoughts on Eels Cowboys World Cup?
Well, that running thing is interesting because it's something that basically any sport in which you come up against a defensive line, I can think of parallels, just the idea of engaging defenders, basically. You don't even have to get the running meters as a NRL half. You just have to show them that you can get the running meters, and they have to respect it. It's the same in football. If you just pass the ball around a penalty area, you don't really get anywhere if a defense can sit tight. But if you can show that you can dribble past the defender, even if you don't do it, just show that you can step over and cut back or something like that, they can't stand off you if that's the case. They have to step up and close you in, or you go to them and get them on their heels, kind of thing. You engage them and suddenly there's something to do. NFL, absolutely, all over the show, that kind of thing, engaging defenders. Even if you're a wide receiver who's not going to get the ball, you're trying to drag a defender away from somewhere else. And if they don't follow you, then maybe you will get the ball because the quarterback will call off the call and say, well, that guy's open. We'll have that one instead. Even basketball, it's the same idea kind of as being a three-point shooter. They got to close you out. If you're not a three-point shooter, they don't have to close you out. They can step back and just make sure you can't guard to the rim, sort of thing. It's pretty important. Any sport you come up against a defensive line, it's pretty important to be able to just make sure that line isn't dictating how things go. You tell them, you have to respect the skill that I have, and you can't leave your position and help someone else. You have to stay where you are, or I'm just running straight through. The other idea I have, unless you want to add to that,
the basketball all the comparisons stand pretty well. The basketball one's interesting because it's a two-pronged thing where if you're not able to shoot a three-pointer, I'm going to leave you alone and help on someone else, and then we can be a better defensive team. So you need to be able to shoot the three-pointer to engage that defender, as you said. The thing that pops up with Dylan Brown is, to help your team shoot better three-pointers, you need to attack the basket.
Yeah.
So you need to attack the basket, draw the defenders in to stop that layup or slam dunk, and then that opens space for your three-point shooters. So Dylan Brown needs to attack the basket, in this analogy, play direct, and then that opens space for the other guys.
Yeah, and it goes both ways, because if you hit your three-pointers, they close out and someone else is free closer to the rim if you can get a pass around or whatever. Like they both complement each other, and for better and for worse, because if you don't do it, they both are to the detriment of each other. Maybe that swings back to sort of like that mindfulness thing at the start about the thing that I can't even remember what it was. The thing that you don't do will destroy you if you don't whatever. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. That's similar. You can sort of draw a line of comparison between that idea.
So if you don't bring forth your direct running, that hurts you.
Yeah, that actually sounds too simple to put it that way. These feel like the two best Kiwi-NRL teams that are remaining. Panthers got one or two, don't they? But they're a little bit more like reserve graders where you find all the good Kiwis, I think, with the Panthers, and the Rabbitohs are less so than that. So whichever team goes through to the final from these two, you're going to have at least a couple of exciting Aotearoa players to pay attention to. Do you see either of these teams being able to put up like a full-on? I mean, obviously the Eels have already been smoked by the Panthers one time. Most likely, we're saying if it's, we'll ignore the possibility of the Rabbitohs getting an upset because the Panthers are clear favourites going forward. If the Rabbitohs win, then either of these teams could beat the Rabbitohs as well. That'd just be a good game, like a good, nice, even game. If the Panthers do win as expected, do you see the Eels or the Cowboys being able to topple them in a grand final?
Eels more so than the Cowboys. Like I
guess they've had a good look at them, even if they did lose that game. That does help.
There is something about the Cowboys. There is definitely a vibe to what they're doing. Like they just seem to be doing everything right. There's a certain belief. There's a bit of magic. Like Todd Payton sprinkled some magic dust up there. Everything's trucking along.
Well-coached team, yeah.
And while I think the Eels and Panthers are better teams than the Cowboys have something about them. They know what they do. They do it very well. And there is like all that stuff about Taumalolo that applies to every other player. Like every other player up there will be developing new skills, finding different aspects of their game that they can execute, and that is dangerous. Because suddenly if every single player has added a couple skills or a different ways to impact the game, even over the course of the season, like Taumalolo has played over 60 minutes throughout the season, and then he played 82, 83 minutes in a finals game. So it's like all that stuff that you're working on during the season then comes out in finals footy. And like even just the idea of like Valentine Holmes on one center, on the left edge, Peter Hiku on the right edge. You can go to either center and all you need to do is shuffle the footy to them one-on-one. They might be able to create something, let alone anything else you can do to get them on the outside of their opposition center. Because like when Peter Hiku put the shuffle on Talakai, it was just a one-on-one matchup, shuffle to the outside, offload, try. And Valentine Holmes can do similar things. So it's that kind of... And they've just got a weird forward pack. Ruben Cotter's a little fella to go with the Taumalolo. Like, they got... Here's a classic one for you, Wildcard, the different body shapes and sizes. I think we've talked about this before, where you look at that Cowboys forward pack, Taumalolo is one size and one stature. Ruben Cotter, different size, different stature. Jordan McLean, different size, different stature. And then you might have any number of other players popping around. That is, like, all of that just combines for a funky Cowboys team. And I'm thinking about the Eels. So the Eels' weakness is their inconsistency. That's hard to predict. The Cowboys' threat to the whole competition is that you don't necessarily know what they're going to do. Because I think they're just well coached and they've got a variety of different weapons. They can use their weapons in different ways. Like Chad Townsend might just control a game, and that might be enough. And then also you might get Taumalolo out of dummy half, and you might just get Peter Hiku, bit of magic. or Jeremiah Nanai catches every single bomb for some reason. So it's the one thing that I think favors the Eels. Well, not the one thing, but one thing is Jeremiah Nanai plays on the right edge. Isaiah Papali'i plays on the right edge for the Eels. So Papali'i is going to line up against Tom Gilbert, fine NRL player, and Luciano Leilua. So I think Papali'i can win that matchup. And if Papali'i is winning that matchup, he is also bringing in a few amount of tackles to the half that defends on that edge. I'm not sure who it is exactly. Either Dearden or Townsend. And then suddenly what we're talking about with the Eels, their strength is punching through the line. If Papali'i punches through the line on the right edge, then they can swing it back to Sean Lane. He punches through on the left edge. Suddenly Dylan Brown's involved, and it just seems to work. So I think Papali'i might be heavily involved in some really dynamic running down that edge to target Gilbert, because Gilbert starts and then Leilua comes on off the bench, and really challenge, especially Leilua. If they can challenge Leilua and the half, I think that would be great for the Eels.
Yeah, old mate, lucky Leilua, right? It was Dragons old boy who, it felt, whenever he played for the Dragons, it felt like he could be the best player on the field, but he's also likely to drop the ball in the next hit up sort of thing. Like he was big extremes. It does feel like that. Well, first of all, that's not the case of like the model of this Cowboys team is not a team that does that kind of thing, like big extremes. But
I think
I guess you play in a better team, you play better, I guess, is the
everything
point.
you are thinking about Leilua right now is more about the Dragons than Leilua.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So just call your Jets, you know?
Didn't he go to the Tigers in between though, or was that beforehand? I can't remember.
Yeah, but the Tigers aren't necessarily head and shoulders better than the Dragons in this.
Well,
context.
no, that's what I mean. They're worse. Yeah. So he's found a home. Good for him. He's a good player.
Let me put it this way. If I was Luciano Leilua, I'd be leaving the Dragons ASAP as well.
Yep.
The Panthers-Rabbitohs game wildcard, like obviously fantastic game of footy. Lots of different players involved. Going to be fun. Finals footy, yippee. Everything is crystal clear here, though, because when you think about the Rabbitohs, you're thinking Latrell Mitchell. How do you slow down Latrell Mitchell? You peg the Rabbitohs in their own end, and you make it as gritty and grimy as possible. What do the Penrith Panthers do well? They've got the best kicker in the NRL, Nathan Cleary. And their kick chase is neck level. Often leading that kick chase is Moses Leota and James Fisher-Harris, both of whom are very eager defenders. I'll put it that way. And what often happens is you'll get someone else, like they don't shirk away from their running the footy mahi. Like their Fisher-Harris will have 15 runs for 160 meters. That is his bread and butter. Obviously, Moses Leota is very powerful as well. But what often happens is you might have Dylan Edwards take the last tackle, and somehow Dylan Edwards he's not overly, he is fast, but he's not Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, right? Like he's not James Tedesco.
He's a different kind of fast, eh? He doesn't look like, he doesn't have long Usain Bolt legs kind of quickness like some of the fullbacks, or
but he's also
like a Pappenhausen or someone. But yeah, he is a frisky one because you don't look at him and be like, this is the X factor of his game. But I guess maybe that's the point, is he's just a guy who doesn't have really any weaknesses as a fullback.
He definitely doesn't have any weaknesses, and that's why he is a championship fullback. Like, it's funny, you can talk about who's the best fullback and all this stuff. Well, who is the most winning fullback?
Yeah.
Like Dylan Edwards
kind
only
of
has
one. Prefer to be.
Dylan Edwards only has one championship, so I can't say it's Dylan Edwards, but if Dylan Edwards has 2 or 3 NRL championships, he's a pretty good fullback.
He might have 2 in a couple of weeks, you know.
Exactly. So he doesn't have any weaknesses, but he does have a low-key strength of powerful running. And he often takes the last hit up in a set, and he makes meters through the guts, quick play the ball for Nathan Cleary. So instead of Fisher Harris taking that last hit up, which he might do, or Moses Leota taking the last hit up, they are ready for the kick chase. To the extent where I watched some footage and like Fisher Harris lines up right beside Nathan Cleary, he takes a peep over his shoulder to make sure he's in line with Nathan Cleary. And then he just like, as soon as Cleary kicks it, he's off sprinting downfield, which is different. Again, Fisher Harris might find himself in this position. This stuff happens, but usually all the forwards are 10 meters in front of the kicker, which is all good. You just need to let the receiver, I think the rule is they have to run 10 meters before you can engage. But if the Penrith Panthers, like I've got this vision, right? So they play the ball with center of the field, slightly left. They pass it out to Nathan Cleary on the right of the play the ball. Outside Nathan Cleary, there's like Fisher Harris, maybe Leota, and then edge forward, center, so on. They are all in line with Nathan Cleary. So that means they are onside. So then they can smash the receiver as soon as he gets the footy. They don't have to wait for that receiver to run 10 meters. Whether they do that or whether they're in front of the kicker and then they just form a solid line, they're going to be up in Latrell Mitchell's grill, and they're going to be up in any of the wingers' grill. And as exciting and as fun and funky as the Panthers are with the footy, Fisher Harris is going to be exceptional. Leota is going to be amazing. Scott Sorensen coming off the bench is very powerful and exciting as well. It's this one detail that really intrigues me, wildcard, because it's a Panthers' strength with Cleary, as well as the specific kick chase skill set of Leota and Fisher Harris. And what is the Rabbitohs' biggest weapon? It's Latrell Mitchell. So I'm fascinated at how those two little battles line up.
Yeah, Fisher Harris, Leota, and Cleary, all Kiwi junior footballers in their own way. Cleary played Mount Albert. Where did he play? He played football for Ellerslie, I remember, because I remember not knowing who Nathan Cleary was when he was like 10, but my brother played at a tournament who was a similar age. And Ivan Cleary was obviously, because they were living there, Ivan Cleary was coaching the Warriors at this time. I remember watching some of it and my dad being like, "That's Ivan Cleary." And I looked at it is Ivan Cleary. I guess his son plays football or something. I don't know. This was many years ago, but
there was a yarn, I think it might have been an NRL.com yarn this week where they interviewed some Mount Albert folks, like club folks.
Really?
And they were saying like how he was kicking like sideline conversions when he was 12, like fresh off his soccer career. And like he could just like do things that other kids couldn't do. Funnily enough, wildcard, that might mean Nathan Cleary more junior rugby league in Aotearoa than Moses Leota. So there's no I don't know Moses Leota's junior club in Aotearoa. Don't even know, like, I just say he's from Auckland, like that's how I define it. Nathan Cleary, certified Mount Albert Junior. So
there you go. I don't know if he played football for Ellerslie or if Ellerslie hosted the tournament, come to think of it. I don't know actually. Either way, I don't know what team Ivan was there to support or anything, or if he was doing a little bit of coaching on the side. I have no idea, but that was just an anecdote that came to mind.
If you are trying to design a halfback, you'd want them playing some soccer early on.
It is a good learning curve, I'd imagine, is just to get that balance and also that kicking ability, at a young age.
And what is Nathan Cleary, like, obviously not quite as good as Dylan Brown, but fairly good at running the footy and tackling. So Nathan Cleary, young, half Palangi, half Pakia, rugby league player in Auckland, probably learned how to tackle in that stage of his rugby league
I'd imagine
career.
So. He would have had a few fellas running straight at him, so even at that age.
I think his house
Especially just
partner.
because he's Australian. If anyone knew who his dad was as well, his dad coaches the Warriors. Oh, well, I got a bit of run it hard than this guy. His dad might see, and I might get signed for the junior team or something. Like, you're going to target that dude. I remember playing football against one time. This was in the year when I was playing for quite a social team. And there was a dude on the other team who who was on Shortland Street. I didn't recognize him, didn't know who he was, but others did, which is maybe a bit damning on them. But some people enjoy it, whatever the old soap operas. But he was young too. He was like 18 or 19. He was a character on Shortland Street, and everyone was just like, "I'm gonna smash him." I don't know that they did because those guys weren't that good, but still,
I'm gonna send him to Shortland Street.
Yeah, I could put him in the hospital for real. He'll know what he's doing.
Big up Nathan Cleary. Big up Mount Albert. Big up Rugby League. Big up Aotearoa Sport. Massive round of Kiwi-NRL finals. And we will be back next week with more podcasts. Stay tuned. Friday night email dispatch. Danish-cage.com. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Cha-cha.